There are moments in history where the world quietly shifts into a more dangerous place, not with a single explosion or declaration of war, but with a series of decisions that most people never notice. Treaties expire, guardrails are removed, and long standing assumptions break down. And by the time the public realizes what's happening, the strategic landscape has already changed. Over the last few years, especially over the last several months, we've crossed one of those thresholds. Nuclear arms control is unraveling. Nuclear testing is back on the table. Major powers are modernizing, expanding, and in some cases, openly threatening their arsenals. And the systems that once kept escalation in check are weakening. This isn't Cold War nostalgia, this is a new, less stable era, and it directly affects you, your family, and how prepared you should be going forward. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the One Row. I'm David, and on this channel, we talk about preparedness, personal responsibility, and understanding risk. Not to scare people, but to help you make better decisions in an increasingly unstable world. Today's topic is heavy, but it's really, really important. We're talking about the emerging nuclear threat landscape, the end of key treaties, the resumption of nuclear signaling and testing discussions, what Russia and China are doing right now, and where the United States is falling behind, and what realistic, rational preparedness looks like in this new environment. But before we dive in, if you value level-headed analysis, preparedness without panic, and honest conversations about the world we're actually living in, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you have not, and share it with somebody that you care about. That support helps this content reach more people who need to hear it. Now, for decades, nuclear weapons were governed by a fragile but functional system of treaties, verification regimes, and mutual restraint. It wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough to prevent catastrophe. Those systems are now eroding. The Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty is gone. The Open Skies Treaty is gone. The New START Treaty, the last remaining major arms control agreement between the US and Russia, has expired, and there is little realistic chance of a replacement in the current geopolitical climate. That means for the first time since the early Cold War, there are no binding limits on deployed strategic nuclear weapons between major powers. Russia has been very explicit about what this means. Moscow has suspended participation in New START inspections, openly discussed resuming nuclear testing, and incorporated nuclear threats into its conventional war rhetoric in ways we have not seen in decades. Tactical nuclear weapons have been moved closer to NATO borders near Ukraine. Nuclear signaling has become routine rather than exceptional. This is not just messaging, it's normalization. When nuclear threats become part of everyday geopolitical discourse, the risk of miscalculations rises sharply. China, meanwhile, is pursuing a different but equally consequential path. For years, China maintained a relatively small nuclear deterrent focused on minimum retaliation. That doctrine is changing. Satellite imagery and open source intelligence confirms the construction of hundreds of new missile silos. China is expanding its warhead stockpile, improving delivery systems, and investing largely and heavily in hypersonic glide vehicles that challenge existing missile defenses. Unlike the US and Russia, China has never been part of meaningful arms control agreements, and there is currently no framework to bring them into one. We are moving toward a three-power nuclear world without shared rules, shared assumptions, or shared transparency. The ripple effects of this extend far beyond the major powers. When nuclear norms erode at the top, smaller nuclear-armed states take notice. India and Pakistan already exist in a hair-trigger environment with short missile flight times and unresolved territorial disputes. North Korea continues to refine both its weapons and its delivery systems, including solid-fuel ICBMs and submarine-launched platforms. When testing resumes or becomes normalized again, it lowers the political cost for others to follow suit. Proliferation pressures increase, not decrease. Now, if you made it this far in the video, we might be on the same page, so come check out our live streams on Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. Now, here in the United States, the conversation is complicated by some uncomfortable realities. The U.S. nuclear arsenal still works, we think, but it is old. Many warhead designs date back to the 70s and 80s. The nuclear weapons production complex is atrophied after decades of neglect. We currently lack the ability to rapidly produce new warheads at scale. Plutonium pit production is behind schedule. That's the explosive cores. Modernization programs are delayed and over budget. The Sentinel ICBM program, intended to replace the Minuteman III missiles, has faced cost overruns and timeline slips. Additionally, the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine program, which is critical to the sea-based leg of our nuclear triad, is also under pressure. These are not partisan talking points, they are acknowledged issues within the defense establishment. At the same time, there is renewed discussion within U.S. policy circles about whether nuclear testing may need to resume, not because it's desirable, but because confidence in aging warheads without live testing is increasingly questioned in a world where adversaries are modernizing aggressively. Nuclear weapons age in ways that are difficult to simulate. Most U.S. warheads, which were designed in the 70s or 80s, they rely on extremely precise interactions between high explosive, plutonium pits, electronics, and fusion components. Over time, materials change. Plutonium slowly alters its crystal structure. High explosives can chemically degrade. Polymers, seals, and wiring age. Tritium, which is the hydrogen isotope that boosts yield, decays and must be replenished regularly. Individually, these issues can be modeled, but their combined effects under the extreme conditions of detonation are impossible to replicate perfectly without a live test. Since the testing moratorium, the U.S. has relied on supercomputers, laser fusion facilities, and subcritical experiments that do not produce a nuclear yield. These tools are extremely advanced and have done an impressive job, but they still depend on assumptions derived from past full-scale tests. Today, we struggle to produce even small numbers of new plutonium pits, and many legacy manufacturing techniques no longer exist. When you refurbish a warhead using new materials, new processes, and new suppliers, you are effectively creating a new weapon configuration, even if the design lineage is old. Even raising the possibility of nuclear testing signals how far we've come from the post-Cold War assumptions that nuclear risks were permanently declining. So, what could this really look like? Likely nuclear escalation scenarios today are less about intentional full-scale exchange and more about miscalculation, regional conflict spillover, or coercive signaling gone wrong. The most plausible pathways include number one, a major conventional war between nuclear armed states such as NATO with Russia or China with Taiwan and their defenders, where one side faces battlefield defeat and escalates to limited nuclear use to restore deterrence. Second, a regional conflict between rivals like India and Pakistan, where rapid escalation timelines, domestic pressure, and incomplete command and control resilience compress decision making into hours. Or third, a crisis triggered by false warning, cyber interference, terrorist attack, space-based asset disruption, something like that convinces leaders an attack is imminent when it in fact is not. In all cases, escalation is most likely not driven by irrational actors, but by rational leaders operating with incomplete information, degraded communications, and shrinking margins for error, where a single misinterpreted move, failed de-escalation attempt, or technical malfunction could cascade faster than diplomacy can intervene. This is well illustrated in Annie Jacobson's 2024 book Nuclear War: A Scenario, and well worth you to read. So, what does this mean for regular people? It does not mean that nuclear war is inevitable. It does not mean you should live in fear. But it does mean that the probability distribution has changed. Nuclear risk is no longer a theoretical tail risk. It is a real, if still low probability, high impact scenario that deserves rational consideration in your preparedness planning. Preparedness in this context starts with understanding secondary and tertiary effects. At the end of the day, if you're in a blast zone, your level of preparedness likely won't matter. However, a nuclear exchange, even a limited one, would have massive consequences beyond the blast zones. Grid disruption, communication outages, supply chains collapse, financial system shock, mass displacement, political instability would follow. Many of the same preparations that you would prepare for a natural disaster or civil unrest apply here. Water security, food resilience, backup power, medical readiness, and information and communication redundancy. For us in the US, this means taking grid fragility seriously. Nuclear escalation would stress or destroy critical infrastructure, either directly or through cyber or kinetic follow-up attacks. Backup power that does not rely on fuel supply would become important. Solar with battery storage, energy efficiency, and load prioritization would matter. The biggest killer in most nuclear scenarios is not the blast, it's the radiation exposure from fallout in the first 24 to 72 hours. Knowing that fallout intensity drops rapidly with roughly 90% reduction after 7 days informs every other decision when it comes to shelter, when to move, how long to stay put. You don't need a Cold War bunker, but you do need a place that provides mass between you and the fallout. Basements are good, underground parking garages, interior rooms below ground level, or even improvised shelters using earth, concrete, books, and water can dramatically reduce radiation dose. Again, putting mass between you and where there's the fallout. Time, distance, shielding are the core principles. More mass and more time indoors equal survival. Potassium iodide tablets protect the thyroid from radioactive iodine and are especially important for children and pregnant women. They do not protect against all radiation, but they significantly reduce long-term cancer risk when used correctly. A basic nuclear kit should include gas masks for fallout dust, disposable coveralls or old clothing, plastic bags, duct tape, soap, the ability to decontaminate without removing outer layers and washing exposed skin. Fallout contaminates surface water and exposed food. Having sealed, stored water and shelf-stable food for at least 7 to 14 days allow you to stay sheltered through the most dangerous periods of fallout. In a nuclear crisis, information saves lives. Battery-powered or solar radios, weather radios, ham or mesh radios, and offline maps and documents let you understand what's happening when the grid and cell networks fail. Starlink and satellite comms may work in some scenarios, but never assume connectivity will be available. Bugging out after a nuclear detonation is often far more dangerous than sheltering in place. Vehicles stir up fallout dust, roads clog instantly, and exposure spikes. The better plan is usually to shelter first and move later with pre-planned routes, only if relocation becomes necessary days or weeks after the fallout occurs. Fallout exposure, burns, trauma, and stress injuries will overwhelm hospitals immediately. Basic first aid, burn care knowledge, hydration management, and the ability to care for family members at home become critical. This is where training like Stop the Bleed and basic trauma can pay off massively. Preparedness is not about obsession, it's about creating a margin. It's about buying yourself and your family time, options, and flexibility so that fear doesn't drive bad decision making when stress is high. Arms control existed for many years because people understood what failure looked like. The fact that those structures at the national and international level are weakening means responsibility shifts downward to individuals, families, and communities to be more capable, more informed, and more resilient than past generations had to be. While nuclear threats make headlines and the language can sound terrifying, the actual likelihood of a full-scale nuclear exchange remains very low. These weapons exist largely because nobody wants to use them. Deterrence, diplomacy, and sheer self-interest have kept the nuclear threshold intact for decades. Preparing for unlikely but high-impact events isn't about living in fear, but it's about buying peace of mind. The odds are overwhelmingly in favor of us never needing these preparations, and if that's the case, all you've done is become more resilient, more informed, and better prepared for everyday emergencies along the way, such as hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, etc. At the end of the day, we are entering a period where nuclear weapons are no longer a background concern handled quietly by diplomats, but an active factor in global strategy again. That reality doesn't require panic, but it does require honesty. The world is changing, risks are rising, and preparedness is no longer optional if you take responsibility for the people who depend on you. If this video helped clarify the nuclear threat landscape and how you think about preparedness in the years ahead, I'd appreciate you liking it, subscribing to the channel if you haven't, and sharing this video with somebody who needs a clearer picture of what's unfolding. As always, stay grounded, stay capable, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.